The dare at Sterling Tower. Night above the city glowed like a field of cold stars, while inside the Sterling Tower penthouse everything shone with warm golden light as powerful people laughed and talked and lifted glasses that sparkled under chandeliers. And in the center of all this brightness stood Ava Sterling, a woman born into money and fame, dressed in a silver gown that caught every reflection around her. She smiled with the calm confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. And when a guest teased her about love and marriage, she laughed softly and looked toward the piano by the tall window where the city lights stretched far below. And with a playful tone she announced that she would marry anyone who could play her late mother's impossible piano piece. A challenge spoken for amusement, a dare thrown into the air like a jewel, because she believed nobody alive could ever complete it. Guests burst into laughter and applause, pleased by a game that cost them nothing, pleased by a test meant only for show. Some said the piece was cursed. Some said even conservatory prodigies failed at the final turn. Some joked that they would marry her themselves if their fingers knew anything about music. The whole room buzzed with easy joy, the type of joy that comes only from people who never fear embarrassment or hunger or loss. At the edge of this dazzling hall stood Marcus Reed, a quiet black janitor in a dark uniform with a small name badge, wiping fingerprints from a mirror near the service doorway. He should have ignored the noise and the dare. He should have stepped into the corridor with the rest of the staff. But the name of the piece, the tone of the laughter, the sight of the piano near the window stirred something deep inside him, because he knew that melody, not from fancy concerts or teachers, but from his mother, from a worn cassette she kept wrapped in a cloth, a tape she played every Sunday while humming the same fragile notes and telling him that music could turn a broken day into a hopeful one if he listened with his heart. Marcus remembered learning the tune on a church piano that had missing keys and a pedal that squeaked each time he pressed it. He remembered the promise he made to his mother that he would play for crowds someday, and he remembered how life pushed that dream aside when she passed and bills came and rent increased, and he took night jobs to survive. Yet the melody never left him. It lived quietly in his hands even when they carried trash bags instead of sheet music. A loud man with slick hair shouted that the dare was cruel because no one in the room could finish that piece. Another clapped and said it was romantic. Another lifted his drink and joked that Ava should accept a playlist instead. The crowd loved their own voices, and Ava stood by the piano with a flawless smile as flashes from cameras lit her face. The portrait of her mother watched silently from the wall behind her, a woman with warm eyes and a gentle tilt to her head. And for a moment something soft moved across Ava's expression, a small flicker of memory, before she turned back to the guests with her perfect controlled grace. Marcus felt a weight inside him, the kind that comes from staying silent too long, and before he could stop himself he stepped forward from the shadows into the light of the penthouse. One step and then another, until a security guard noticed him and placed a hand in front of him, asking if he needed something. Marcus swallowed and said he could play the piece, not as a joke and not to impress anyone, but because he knew it. He truly knew it. The guard tried to guide him back, but the guests heard and fell into excited whispers, some amused, some curious, some cruel. Ava studied Marcus with an unreadable expression. She asked gently if he even knew the name of the composition, and he replied that he did not know the title, only the soul inside the notes. And this answer, simple and honest, made her pause. Then she told the guard to let him try for 1 minute only, just 1 minute, because the room wanted a show and she wanted to see why a janitor believed he could do what trained musicians could not. Marcus walked to the piano with slow, steady steps, touched the polished wood as if greeting an old friend, sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. The room fell quiet, the laughter faded, even the city lights outside seemed to wait. And when he pressed the first soft note, the sound opened the night like a door, and every person there felt something shift as if a new story had begun, one that none of them expected to witness. Mockery and a single chance. The first gentle notes were still floating through the air when the crowd realized that Marcus was not playing like someone pretending or guessing. He played like a man who carried the music inside his chest for years. Each sound moved with a kind of steady breath that came from truth, not training. And for a moment the people who had laughed earlier stood silent as if unsure whether to admire him or wait for him to fall, because they had not expected this soft and honest power to come from a janitor they had barely noticed all evening. Yet even in their silence there was something sharp, something ready to mock him the second a single wrong key slipped from his fingers. A rich man in a tailored white suit leaned toward his wife and whispered that this would end soon. because the ending of the piece was impossible for amateurs. His wife nodded while pretending to be impressed. A group of young tech investors smirked and prepared to film him failing. And someone near the back whispered that Ava Sterling must be entertained by this strange twist to her party. But Marcus did not look at any of them. He did not care for the faces or the eyes or the subtle cruelty hiding in their half-smiles. He kept his gaze on the keys and his breath steady like a person walking across a narrow bridge. Above deep water, Ava watched him more closely than anyone else. Her expression unreadable. Her arms crossed loosely, but her shoulders tense in a way the cameras could not see. She had invited famous pianists to play this very instrument before, and none had made the room this still, not even for a moment. The way Marcus shaped the opening phrase reminded her of her mother warming up for a performance. Gentle but controlled, soft but certain. And for a brief second Ava wondered if there was something that connected him to her mother's music, something she could not explain with logic or skill alone. Just when the melody reached a delicate turn, a security guard stepped forward with a polite warning that the minute Ava allowed was nearly over. But the crowd complained and asked for more. They wanted to see whether he could break at the next complex rise of notes. Some secretly wanted to clap for him while others wanted to laugh at him. But everyone wanted to watch. And Ava finally lifted her hand again and told the guard to let him continue until the first section was complete. The crowd murmured in excited approval as though she had given them a show worth paying for. Marcus breathed in deeply and continued playing. His hands moved with a confidence that did not come from any music school, but from long hours alone in a silent church, from nights he spent practicing when he should have been sleeping, from mornings he woke before sunrise to touch the keys before leaving for work. And though the piano here was worth more than everything he had earned in years, he treated it with the same gentle respect he gave the old instruments he had used in his childhood, the same care he learned from watching his mother tune the cheap keyboard they once bought from a garage sale. Then the moment the crowd waited for arrived. The infamous shift in the composition where a fast pattern of notes blends into a sudden emotional drop. Many musicians fail here because they rush or hesitate, and the floor of sound collapses beneath them. The room leaned closer, almost as one living creature waiting to taste his defeat. The man in the white suit smirked. Someone whispered finally. But Marcus did not rush and he did not freeze. Instead he let the air guide him, slowing just enough to catch the hidden breath inside the phrase. Remembering the way his mother once tapped his shoulder and said the song is not hard. If you listen to the sadness between the sounds, that sadness is the key. Feel it and follow. I followed it now with steady hands, letting the melody bend without breaking, letting the rise fall smoothly into the next soft curve. The crowd blinked in disbelief because he had passed the section most performers crashed at, and that small victory filled Marcus with a quiet courage that warmed him from inside, like a candle in a dark room. Yet he did not smile or show pride. He simply kept moving forward because he knew the true challenge was still ahead, the final turn, the ending that twisted like a staircase with missing steps before he reached it. The piano let out a faint uneven vibration, a sign that one of the strings was slightly loose, a sign that could ruin the rhythm if he was not careful. The sound was too subtle for the crowd to notice, but Marcus felt it under his fingertips, like a tiny warning. He adjusted instantly, shifting the weight of his touch and adding a softer resonance with his left hand, shaping a harmony that disguised the flaw without calling attention to it. And the room sighed, as though the music itself had survived a storm. A few people clapped quietly, before catching themselves. The investors stopped smirking for a moment, and Ava's eyes widened though her posture remained elegant and calm. She knew the instrument well. She knew its tiny scars and hidden temper. She knew what Marcus had just corrected without words, and that realization pressed into her heart with a strange and unfamiliar weight. Something like respect mixed with curiosity mixed with a memory she could not pull into full shape. But not everyone was pleased. One man stepped closer and announced loudly that this was enough, that tricks and luck did not mean genius. He said a janitor had no place making a mockery of her mother's masterpiece. The tone was cruel enough to cut through the last note Marcus played, and the room turned tense as the edges of class and pride and fear collided in the same breath. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys but did not stand yet. He turned his head slowly toward the man, and the crowd watched him like a figure in a story they had not expected to witness tonight. The music still hovered in the air behind him like a soft, invisible light, and as the room waited in silent tension, something shifted deep inside Marcus, something that said he had been quiet long enough, and one chance was not enough to show the truth he carried in his heart. And the truth was that He could finish the piece. Every note, every breath, every hidden meaning sewn inside it by a woman he had never met, but somehow understood. And as the room held its breath, he looked toward Ava, with calm, steady eyes, and he told her that he was ready to play the rest if she would allow it. And the room felt the beginning of a fire they did not yet understand, but could no longer ignore. A first notes and old wounch. Room felt tighter than before as Marcus sat at the piano with his fingers resting just above the keys, and every guest leaned forward with a mixture of thrill and disbelief because the idea of a janitor finishing a legendary piece felt impossible, and yet the way he handled the first sections made the impossible feel strangely close, like something just out of reach but real enough to shake their certainty. The rich man in the white suit breathed out loudly as if annoyed by the growing respect around him. A few women near the balcony whispered that they had goosebumps, and Ava Sterling stood with her arms at her sides no longer crossed, watching Marcus not like entertainment, but like a puzzle that held a missing part of her mother's world. Marcus inhaled slowly, as memories of old wounds rose inside him like ghosts that refused to stay hidden. He remembered his mother bent over the peeling church piano, teaching him the rhythm of listening before playing, telling him that music was not about perfection, but about carrying truth from one heart to another. He remembered how she would close her eyes and sway slightly when he reached a soft note, and how she would smile as if the world around them had stopped hurting for a little while. But he also remembered the night when all the chances he had worked for fell apart, because after she passed away he missed the scholarship audition, while working extra hours to pay for her hospital bills. He remembered the dream of becoming a pianist slipping from his hands like sand, while he tried to hold together a life that kept breaking apart. These memories did not weaken him now. They guided him, strengthening his focus as he placed his hands on the keys again. The crowd held its breath as the first new note echoed through the penthouse, warm and fragile and clear, like a single drop falling into still water. He shaped the next notes, gently letting them bloom into a soft rising arc that carried the same sadness and patience his mother had taught him. The melody stretched across the room like a thin golden thread, connecting him to everyone listening. Even those who wished he would fail. Simeon near the front whispered that this was unreal. Someone else whispered that maybe he practiced in secret for years, and another whispered that this felt like watching a man play his own heartbeat. But Marcus did not hear or care for any of these words, because the music was guiding him, like a river that had waited a long time to flow freely. His shoulders relaxed and his hands glided across the keys with a confidence that surprised even him. Not because he doubted himself, but because the piano responded to him with a softness he had never felt before on any instrumental. Through the next sequence, a faint crack slipped from the right side of the piano where the earlier loose string vibrated again. The wealthy guests murmured, expecting him to stumble, but Marcus adjusted instantly by shifting the pattern and weaving a new harmony that embraced the flaw instead of fighting it, turning it into part of the emotional voice of the piece. It felt as if he was choosing to heal a wound instead of hiding it, and the room fell into a deeper silence as they realized he was not only playing the music, he was saving it in real time. That silence carried old pain with it, and Marcus slipped into a memory of his mother teaching him how to hum the part where the heart drops before the melody rises again. He remembered how she said, "This is where life breaks a little, but keeps moving." And as he played that same place now, he felt the old hurt settling into something strong, instead of something sharp. His fingers softened at the exact moment the melody bent downward, and the sound that emerged was not just music. It was a quiet cry that every person in the room felt, even if they did not understand. Why Eva stepped closer without meaning to, drawn by the way Marcus played a phrase she had heard countless musicians attempt, but never deliver with the same raw honesty. It reminded her of the nights when she was small and her mother would sit at the piano after long days and play softly while Ava lay on the couch pretending to sleep. She felt her throat tighten as if something in Marcus's sound unlocked the memory she had kept sealed behind years of business and expectations, and the heavy loneliness that came with being admired but not understood. Then the most difficult transition arrived, the one that sounded deceptively simple but carried the true emotional weight of the piece. A shift from grief to hope so subtle that most performers rushed it or clipped the breath between the notes. Marcus slowed here, letting the room breathe with him, letting the keys whisper instead of shout, and even the people waiting to mock him felt their chests tighten as if something inside them had been touched against their will. City lights blinked beyond the glass wall, like distant watchers. The air thickened with unspoken feelings, and every guest stood trapped between admiration and disbelief, because this was no performance they expected. This was the truth of a man who had carried music quietly through years of struggle and silence. A man whose wounds shaped the very sound coming from the piano. As Marcus reached the end of the section, he paused for a breath, not from fear but from understanding that the final turn of the piece, the one that destroyed even trained musicians, was coming next. And while the crowd braced themselves hoping to witness either brilliance or collapse, Marcus lifted his head slightly toward the portrait of Ava's mother on the wall, almost as if seeking her permission or her blessing. And the room felt that small motion like a spark in the darkness, the kind of spark that appears right before something life-changing begins. The piano secret room felt as if time had paused, waiting for Marcus to begin the next part of the piece, the part that broke even the most skilled performers, the part that Ava's mother herself had rewritten again and again before settling on a version that no one had ever fully mastered. And Marcus sat with the melody resting softly in his hands like a living thing, choosing whether to breathe or stay silent. The air in the penthouse grew heavy and warm as every person leaned forward, with a mixture of tension and wonder, unsure whether they were about to witness greatness, or a fall so sharp it would echo in their memories for years. Marcus lowered his gaze to the keys, and felt a strange pull, as if the piano itself was calling to him, not with sound, but with a quiet message hidden beneath its polished surface. He touched the wood just below the fallboard, and for a moment his fingertip brushed over an uneven line, something carved lightly into the inner edge, a tiny groove that did not match the clean luxury of the instrument. Curiosity tugged at him and he lifted the fallboard a little higher, something no one else noticed because all eyes were fixed on his hands and face, and he saw a small inscription, barely visible, scratched into the wood in thin fading strokes, a message left by someone who loved the instrument deeply. A message written in a hand that trembled with emotion, the same hand that had composed the piece he was about to play, the same hand painted in the portrait across the room, the same hand that once held a young Ava during nights filled with soft music, and quieter. Fierce message read nothing poetic or fancy. It was simple, almost a whisper trapped in wood. It said the ending must fall like rain, not like thunder. Let it land where the heart breaks and rises again. Let the silence guide you home. And Marcus felt the words sink into him like warm light, as if the woman who wrote them placed her hand gently on his shoulder, and told him that he was meant to find them. He understood instantly why no musician had ever completed the piece the way she intended, because the sheet music did not match this inscription. The written notes demanded precision and strength, a tight controlled fall. But this message spoke of softness, of surrender, of letting the music breathe into silence before rising again with a kind of fragile hope that required pain, not perfection. And Marcus knew this feeling well because he had lived it. He had walked through broken days carrying melodies that healed him one breath at a time. Eva, standing only a few steps away, noticed the way he paused and looked beneath the fallboard. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Confusion flickered in her expression, because she had owned this piano for years and never seen anyone find anything strange in it. Yet the look in Marcus's eyes told her he had discovered something she had missed. Something connected to her mother, something she herself had never been trusted with, and the realization tightened her chest in a way she could not explain. Marcus returned his hands to the keys, and for a second he closed his eyes, not out of doubt but out of reverence, letting the message sink into his heart, letting his mother's memory blend with the quiet guidance of the woman who had written those words long before her life ended. And when he opened his eyes again, the entire room felt the shift. A stillness swept across the space like a soft wind passing through tall grass, and the melody that followed carried a weight no one had expected. Teta played the first note of the final section with a tenderness that surprised the guests. Instead of attacking the complex rise with force, he let it flow like a trembling breath, each sound falling gently into the next, not crashing, not rushing, just settling into the room like fresh rain sliding down a window. And the shift in his interpretation stunned even the harshest critics. Someone near the back whispered that he was changing the very structure of the piece, but Ava knew instantly that he was not changing it. He was restoring it. His fingers moved like a storyteller's voice, weaving through sorrow and hope. Each small pause wrapped the crowd in quiet awe. The melody bent without breaking, sinking into softness before lifting again like a bird rising from a storm. And the flawed string in the piano that had caused trouble before now blended into the emotional tone, vibrating gently as though it too understood the shift, adding a faint trembling texture that made the sound feel more human, more alive, more honest. Ava pressed her hand against her chest as the memory of her mother sitting exactly where Marcus sat washed over her. She remembered nights when she was a child lying on the thick rug, while her mother played the same melody with tears shining on her cheeks, and she remembered asking why the ending always sounded like it hurt, and her mother answering in a soft, tired voice that pain and hope often live in the same house. You must let one lead you to the other, and in this moment Ava understood that Marcus was unlocking something hidden inside the music, something only someone who carried old wounds and deep love could reveal. The room felt smaller, as if drawn close by the emotional gravity of the sound. Even the city outside seemed to still its restless lights to listen. Marcus reached the final ascent, and instead of climbing fast he let the notes rise like slow rain turning into sunlight, each tone gliding upward as if seeking a place of peace. And the room felt that rise inside their chests, a soft lifting sensation that made even the hardest hearts soften. The final phrase arrived like a breath held for years, and finally released in one long gentle exhale. When the last note faded, every person stood frozen, caught between disbelief and awe, and Marcus did not look proud or fearful. He looked calm, like a man who had simply spoken the truth of his silence. Ava realized with a sudden painful clarity that her mother had written this ending for someone who understood loss and love, not skill alone, and Marcus had just shown her what that truth sounded like in the hands of the right heart. Backlash and truth. Last note of Marcus's performance had barely faded when the room erupted into a confused storm of voices and emotions swirling together like wind hitting broken glass. Some guests clapped in shock with wide eyes and trembling hands. Others whispered that they had witnessed something impossible. A few stepped back as if afraid of what they had just felt, but not everyone reacted with admiration, because where beauty rises, envy often follows. And the wealthy man in the white suit stepped forward with a tight smile that looked more like a crack in stone than a gesture of respect. Raised his voice above the murmurs and insisted that the performance must have been a trick, claiming that no janitor could understand such a complex composition, saying that Marcus had rehearsed secretly with someone who knew Ava's mother, or that maybe Marcus had found the sheet music years ago and memorized it like a thief, memorizing a safe code. The accusations fell sharply into the room and made several guests nod with uncertain faces, because doubt is always easier to accept than the idea that greatness can rise from places they do not expect. A wave of murmurs grew louder as people grabbed their phones, some filming Marcus's calm expression, others whispering theories to make sense of what they had witnessed. A group of reporters who had been covering the charity gala for the society pages suddenly found themselves with something far more sensational than expensive dresses and celebrity guests, and their cameras flashed relentlessly as if trying to freeze Marcus's story before it could breathe. The Marcus stood slowly, not defensive and not proud, only steady, his hands still warm from the keys, his heartbeat returning to a slow rhythm as he faced the crowd that had transformed from curious to frantic in a matter of moments. He did not raise his voice or argue. He simply looked at the man who had accused him and then at the guests, whose whispers had sharpened into gossip, and he felt a familiar ache, the ache of being doubted for existing in a space not built for him. Ava stepped between Marcus and the murmuring crowd in a move so unexpected that several people gasped. She raised her hand with a commanding grace that silenced the room faster than any speech could, her voice calm but sharp as she asked the guests if they had forgotten what they had heard, if they had truly missed the emotion that had filled her mother's piano, if they believed their own prejudice more than their own ears. Her words sliced through the doubt like a clean blade, but even her presence could not control the chaos outside the penthouse, because news spread faster than truth, and within an hour the story reached social media, tabloids, and entertainment sites across the city. Headlines exploded with dramatic exaggerations, some calling Marcus a hidden prodigy discovered at a billionaire's gala, others calling him a fraud who tricked the elite, and a few cruel voices twisted the narrative into racially charged comments meant to question his intelligence and worth. Back inside Sterling Tower, Marcus slipped away from the main hall and returned to the service corridor, where harsh fluorescent lights and narrow walls made the world feel smaller and safer. He took off his uniform jacket and folded it over his arm while breathing deeply to steady himself. Though he felt shaken by the attention and the noise, he also felt strangely free, as if the music had told his truth louder than any words could. Other staff members glanced at him, with wide eyes filled with pride and disbelief, some patting his shoulder, some whispering that they had never seen anything like what he had done. And though their encouragement warmed him, Marcus kept walking until he reached the stairwell, leaning against the cold railing as he processed everything that had happened. The memories of his mother flooded his mind with painful sweetness, reminding him that she had always said the world might not listen at first, but the right moment would come. And maybe this had been that moment, even if it arrived wrapped in Chao's meanwhile. Ava retreated into her private study after the guests began dispersing, her heart pounding with a sense of awakening she had never felt before. She paced back and forth, replaying every sound Marcus had shaped, every subtle shift he had made, every breath between the notes that matched her mother's hidden message. She felt something break open inside her, a mixture of grief and wonder and fear that she had lived for years beside a piano holding a secret her own mother had left for someone who understood music in a way she never had. She opened the drawer of her mother's old music desk and pulled out the original handwritten drafts of the composition, pages covered with erased markings, sketches, and emotional scribbles. She compared them carefully to the sheet music everyone used today, and her breath caught as she realized Marcus had played the hidden version, the version her mother had intended, the version softened by sorrow and reshaped by love, a version no one had ever been taught except perhaps by accident or fate. A tremor filled her hands as she whispered into the empty room that the ending had always felt wrong, when performed by others, too stiff, too polished, lacking the fragile softness her mother had poured into her final years. And now she knew why, because the world had never heard the true version until tonight, until Marcus unlocked it with pain and hope stitched into each note outside the tower. The world argued loudly over him, but inside Ava's heart the truth settled quietly like dust falling in a sunbeam. Marcus had not stolen anything. He had revealed something that belonged to her mother's memory, something sacred, something honest, and now she felt a responsibility rising within her, a need to protect him from the storm he did not create, and a need to understand the connection between him and the music her mother once called the sound of home's second performance. And real hearts. Night after the gala settled over the city like a heavy blanket filled with whispers and arguments, because the story of the janitor who played the impossible piece had spread through every corner of the internet. Some people called him a miracle, others called him a fraud. Many argued loudly without knowing anything about him, and the noise filled Marcus's phone with endless notifications he refused to check. He sat on the small couch in his modest apartment with the lights off, feeling the quiet press against him like a warm hand reminding him that silence was still a place where he could breathe. Yet even here he could not escape the memory of the melody he played, the look on Ava's face, or the way the crowd had torn itself apart trying to decide whether to praise him or destroy him. Marcus had returned to work the next evening, arriving through the back entrance of Sterling Tower with his cap pulled low and his shoulders tense. He hoped to sweep floors and wipe glass without anyone recognizing him. But the moment he stepped inside the service elevator, he felt the shift in the air. The staff looked at him with reverence mixed with fear, as if standing too close might pull them into the chaos surrounding him. A few offered quiet congratulations. Others kept their distance, unsure whether they should speak at all. But Marcus simply nodded and moved through the hallway with a calm, steady pace that hid the storm twisting inside him. When he reached the top service floor, a security guard stepped out of the shadows and told him that Ava Sterling wanted to see him in the penthouse. The words made his heartbeat stumble because he had not expected to be anywhere near her again. He had already prepared himself to fade back into the quiet corners of the building, but something in the guard's voice held no threat or accusation, only a formal respect that made Marcus follow without protest. The elevator ride felt impossibly long as he remembered every emotion from the night before, and wondered whether this invitation meant praise, anger, apology, or something he could not name. The penthouse looked different now, quieter, darker, touched by the soft glow of a few lamps instead of the blinding lights from the gala. And in the middle of the room, Ava stood by the piano wearing a simple dark sweater instead of a glittering gown, her hair slightly messy as if she had been pacing for hours, her expression serious but softened by something deeply human, something Marcus had not seen in her before. When she turned to him, there was no arrogance in her eyes, no distance, only a heavy mixture of questions and gratitude. She thanked him for coming and asked him to sit, but he remained standing until she insisted gently with a voice that held none of the sharpness she used during business meetings. She told him she had spent the entire day searching through her mother's handwritten drafts, comparing them to the music he played, and she admitted that he had performed the ending the way her mother intended, but no one else had ever understood. She confessed that she herself had never found the inscription inside the piano, that she had never known her mother left a message hidden beneath the wood, and as she spoke, Marcus saw her shoulders tremble slightly as if she carried more grief and guilt than she ever allowed the world to see. Marcus told her he had not meant to change anything. He simply followed the emotion in the melody. He told her about his mother and how she had taught him to listen to the sadness between the notes. And Ava listened with a stillness so deep that even the city lights outside seemed to pause. The tension in her face slowly melted as she realized his connection to the piece was not luck or trickery, but truth born from pain and love. She walked to the second piano placed across from the main one, a smaller black instrument used for practice, and she asked him softly if he would play the piece again. Not for the world, not for the guests, not for headlines, but for her. Marcus hesitated because the weight of the past 24 hours pressed against him like cold wind, but the sincerity in her voice touched something inside him, and he nodded slowly, taking his seat at the main piano while Ava sat across from him at the smaller one, her fingers hovering above the keys with uncertainty as if she feared being judged. He looked at her briefly and she met his gaze with raw honesty, a look that said she was tired of being perfect and wanted to be real. For once he began to play, not with the intensity of the gala, but with a softer tone that filled the penthouse with warmth. Ava joined after a few breaths, her hands shaking at first, missing a rhythm here and there, but Marcus adjusted instantly, shaping the melody round her hesitations so she could find her place. And slowly her trembling turned into calm control, her notes blending with his like two voices learning to speak the same language for the first time. The duet grew deeper. Something inside Ava opened. She confessed through the music that she had always feared being compared to her mother, that she had avoided playing in front of others because she did not want to disappoint expectations she never agreed to carry. Marcus answered her through the gentleness of his timing, showing her that music was not about perfection but about honesty. And the penthouse became a world made only of sound and breath, a place where their fears, their grief, and their hopes blended into one long rising thread of harmony. When the final notes drifted away, Ava looked at him with eyes shining from unshed tears, realizing that this man she barely knew had shown her more truth about her mother's music than all the trained musicians she had hired in the past. Marcus felt the same heavy softness in his chest, understanding that this moment was not about skill or fame, but about two souls meeting in the same wounded place and finding something warm inside. As they sat in the quiet that followed, Ava breathed out slowly and asked him in a trembling voice if he would stand beside her at a public concert she planned for tomorrow night, not as a servant or a guest, but as the only person who knew how to complete her mother's story through music. And Marcus felt the weight of her words settle into him like a new beginning. He never expected to reach promise kept. The next evening arrived with a soft golden sky stretching over the city like a warm curtain, and inside the grand Sterling Hall people filled every aisle, leaving no empty seat. The air buzzed with whispers because the world had argued about Marcus for an entire day, and now everyone waited to see whether the janitor who stunned a Billionaire gala was a real genius, or just another passing story created by the hunger of the internet. The stage lights glowed faintly over the two pianos placed side by side, one gleaming with the rich shine of Ava's family instrument, and the other a simpler black one that would carry her own voice in the music. Backstage, Marcus stood alone for a moment, holding the edge of a curtain between his fingers, his breathing slow and steady, his heart full but not afraid, because tonight was not about proving anything to strangers or fighting against doubt. Tonight was about truth, about honoring the melody that shaped his childhood, about honoring the mother he had lost and the woman whose message he found hidden inside the piano, and about honoring Ava, who had chosen to trust him when the world refused to see him. Ava approached him quietly, wearing a simple white dress that flowed around her like soft morning light, her expression calm but filled with emotion, her hands trembling slightly as she asked if he was ready. He looked at her and nodded, not with confidence alone but with gratitude, because she had opened a door for him that had been closed for years, and she had also opened a door inside herself that she had kept locked behind duty and fear. She whispered that whatever happened tonight, the music was theirs, not the crowd's, not the headlines. And those words settled over him like a warm blanket. When they stepped onto the stage, the hall fell silent, thousands of breaths held in one long hush, and Ava walked to her piano while Marcus approached the main one. The hall lights dimmed, leaving only a soft halo round the two of them, and without any grand introduction or speech, Ava lifted her chin toward Marcus in a simple gesture of trust, a signal that they would begin together. And he answered with a quiet nod. Marcus pressed the first key, and the sound rose gently through the hall like a candle flame flickering to life, warm and delicate. Then Ava joined with her own soft notes, weaving into his melody like two threads forming a single, cloth. The harmony grew slowly, filling the hall with a blend of strength and vulnerability, drawing people closer in their seats as if the music itself reached out and touched their chests. Every rise and fall carried the weight of their shared truth. Marcus guided the flow with the same sincerity he used inside the penthouse, while Ava followed him with a grace she never knew she possessed, her movements no longer stiff or fearful but open and real, each note a confession, each pause a breath of trust. And as the melody shaped itself through the hall, people began leaning forward without realizing it, drawn by something deeper than skill, something that felt like a heartbeat learning to heal. When they reached the difficult middle section, Marcus slowed slightly and Ava followed with perfect understanding. The softness filled the hall like rain falling on tired earth, and the flawed vibration of the old piano string blended with the emotional texture, just as it had the night before, creating a trembling beauty that made some listeners place their hands over their hearts, without knowing why, because the music carried pain and hope in every curve, and the hall felt it like a shared memory. Then the final section approached, the one shaped by the hidden inscription, the one that no one else had ever played the way Ava's mother intended, and Ava's hands trembled slightly as she prepared to follow Marcus into the fragile descent. But Marcus glanced at her for a split second, offering reassurance without words, and she steadied her breath, ready to trust and completely let the melody fall like rain, soft and slow, letting each note land as if it had traveled a long journey to reach this hole, letting silence breathe between sounds with a gentleness that made the moment feel sacred. Ava echoed him with her own quiet voice in the music, and together they lifted the final rise like sunlight breaking through clouds, soft and warm and full of hope. The sound filled the hall with a brightness that made several audience members wipe tears from their faces, realizing they were hearing something that came from the deepest corners of two souls, not from technique, but from truth. When the last note faded, the silence that followed was not empty. It was full of awe, full of emotion, full of something too large for words. And then the hall erupted into applause so powerful that the walls seemed to tremble. People stood with tears shining on their cheeks, clapping as if they needed to release everything the music had stirred inside them. And Marcus sat still for a moment, feeling the warmth of that sound wash over him like a blessing he never expected to receive. Ava stood and faced him with eyes overflowing with emotion, the applause still thundering, and she stepped closer, placing her hand gently on his shoulder. She spoke loudly enough for the hall to hear, though her voice trembled with feeling. She said that last night I made a joke that I would marry the person who could play my mother's piece, but tonight I am not joking. Tonight I am asking the man who brought her music back to life if he would honor me with his answer. The hall fell silent again, as every person leaned toward the stage with hearts pounding. Marcus looked at Ava with an expression filled with shock, tenderness, and understanding. He saw the courage it took for her to speak openly in front of the world. He saw the truth in her eyes, and he felt something inside him settle into place. Like a note finally finding its home, he reached for her hand and answered with a voice steady and warm, not for fame, not for wealth, but for the truth they had created together. He said yes, and the hall exploded into applause once more like a wave of light, rising through the room. Weeks later, a new music foundation opened in the name of both their mothers, offering scholarships to children who could not afford lessons. Marcus became its guiding voice, Ava became its heart, and together they built a life shaped not by power or money, but by music, by truth, and by the promise they kept to one another. And whenever Marcus played the final notes of the legendary piece, he played them the way they were written in the hidden message, letting the ending fall like rain and rise like hope, just as it was always meant to be. New beginning wrapped in forever. World soon learned that the story of the billionaire and the janitor was not a tale of luck or shock, but a meeting of two hearts shaped by music and guided by loss and hope. The noise of the internet slowly quieted as people saw the truth in their actions, and the honesty in their connection. And the city that once argued about Marcus now spoke his name with respect, because his music had shown them something deeper than talent. It had shown them what it meant to carry love through hardship, and turn pain into something beautiful. Sterling Foundation grew faster than anyone expected. Young children from forgotten neighborhoods walked into bright rooms full of pianos and violins, and warm teachers, and for the first time many of them touched keys with hands that trembled not from fear, but from excitement. Marcus visited every room each day with a gentle smile that reminded the children that greatness was not something you were born into, it was something you carried in your heart even when the world refused to see you. And Ava stood beside him, guiding the foundation with the same determination she once poured into her business empire. But now, softened by the warmth of purpose. Their wedding was not a grand spectacle with gold decorations or flashing cameras. It was held in the same hall where they played together for the first time. The lights were soft and warm, the air filled with quiet expectation, and the two pianos stood side by side like old friends waiting for one more story to be told. Marcus wore a simple suit that fit him perfectly, and Ava wore a gown touched by gentle silver shimmer that moved like music in the air. And when she walked toward him, their eyes met with the same honesty that had carried them through the storm of doubt and into the calm of truth. He did not recite long vows from printed cards. Instead, Ava placed her hand on the piano lid and said that love was not something loud or perfect. It was something like music that rises slowly through broken places and finds its way to the light. And Marcus rested his hand beside hers and said that she had given him not wealth or fame, but the chance to live the dream his mother once whispered into his heart. The dream of being heard by someone who listened with their soul. When they sat together at the piano, the audience held its breath, not because they expected a performance, but because they knew the melody that followed would be the voice of two hearts choosing each other. Marcus began with a soft rising tone, and Ava followed like a second heartbeat. The music floated through the hall like warm wind through open windows, carrying promises that could never be spoken fully in words. Promises of trust and partnership, and forever woven into each long breath of sound. And when the final note faded, it lingered in the air like a blessing that refused to leave. The guests wiped tears from their cheeks as they watched the two of them sit together at the piano, with their hands intertwined, resting gently upon the keys. The silence that followed felt not empty, but full of meaning, full of peace, full of the kind of love that grows not from perfection, but from two souls recognizing each other. Across the noise of the world from that day forward, Marcus and Ava built a life shaped by music and purpose. They touched thousands of young lives through their foundation. They carried their mother's hopes into every performance. And every night before sleeping, they would sit together at the piano and play the ending of the piece that brought them together, letting it fall like rain and rise like hope, just as it was meant to be. And with each repetition, the melody carved itself deeper into the history of their hearts, until it no longer felt like a song, but like home. And though the world moved on, and new stories rose and fell, people never forgot the tale of the janitor who played like a genius, and the heiress who heard the truth inside his music, because their story was proof that destiny does not always happen in grand rooms or gilded halls. Sometimes it happens in one moment of courage, one breath of honesty, one note played from a wounded heart that keeps beating anyway, and that single note can change everything forever. The end.